Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Courtney and today I'm in a new location. This is my new apartment, so I'm still trying to figure out lighting, sound, all of that good stuff. And this is my first video in this apartment, so this is like the tester video, which is kind of fun. A lot of stuff is going on, but I am really happy with how everything is turning out so far. But anyway, let's get into this video. So I don't really have any videos talking about like my favorite books. There's a lot of books that I like, there's a lot of genres that I like, and today I'm going to be specifically discussing my favorite young adult and adult science fiction and fantasy reads. So there's a couple on here that are more paranormal, more fabulous speculative, but I'm trying to stay more in the high fantasy genre or the high science fiction genre. So there's nothing really here that's like light, magical, fabulous science fiction that could kind of be seen as either magical or just like a metaphor kind of thing. And in the future, I'm planning on doing a speculative fiction, fabulous fiction kind of video that's similar to this, just because I don't see a lot of recommendations for that genre, and that's one of my favorite genres to read from. But yeah, today we're doing fantasy and sci-fi. If you were to ask me what my favorite genre was as a child, it would be fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy back then. It was kind of my focus. I just read a lot of really popular series, and that love of fantasy and science fiction has really stuck with me as an adult. But I would say that I like a very specific kind of fantasy novel. I really like fantasy and science fiction novels that have a strong focus on the characters themselves and their growth and their arc. I think that's why I tend to like a younger protagonist. That's why I do enjoy YA. But honestly, I'm up for a protagonist that's any age, just as long as we see like character development and growth and it's just really focused on their story arc. That's what I really love. And the other thing I like in my books is either a strong setting, strong atmosphere, or strong writing to back up these character arcs and these journeys. And I like books that are doing something. Either that's thematic, it's trying to educate me, it's trying to parallel to our world, it's trying to do something clever with the writing or the perspective. I like science fiction and fantasy books that are doing more than just showing me a cool world or a fun plot. There's lots of books that I enjoy that are more easygoing and fun, but I would say my favorites are books that tend to do something. But yes, let's get into some of these picks. And I would like to stress that these are my current favorite science fiction and fantasy books. So there's a lot of books that I read in my childhood. There's just a lot of older titles that I haven't read in a while. And then there's also books that have kind of not fallen out of my favor, but like it's been a while since I've read them. Other books have replaced them, so I just don't think of them as much, if that makes sense. So if a book isn't on this list and I've read it, it's not that I hate it. It's not that I don't think of it fondly. It's just not like my standout favorite of the moment. For this first book is Ray Bear by Jordan E. Fuego. Ray Bear is the first book in a young adult fantasy series. It's a duology and the second book just came out and I'm really excited to read it. The first book is following a young girl who's been taught from a young age that she has to take revenge for her mother and kill this prince and take over this kingdom. The setting is an African-inspired fantasy setting, and the really unique thing about this series is that the main character has to sneak into this secret council kind of thing. But this book plays with a lot of tropes. It sets up a lot of things that seem very typical for a YA fantasy, but again, it plays with them and it pokes fun at them and it turns them on its head. It was a really refreshing and fun book to read. I really liked the setting. I really liked the characters and their connections. This book was really focused on the main character growing, learning, making her own decisions, becoming independent, struggling with what her mom wanted for her versus what she wanted for herself. It's a really complex, fun YA book. It's very character driven, but again, there's the writing, there's the atmosphere, there's the setting to really back up the characters and their choices. And it was a really strong debut. And again, I'm looking forward to the concluding novel in this duology because it was just phenomenal. And the next book I have on here is The Midnight Lie by Marie Rutowski. This is the first book in a spin-off duology. I enjoyed Marie Rutowski's first trilogy. There's just something about The Midnight Lie that was just so much more exceptional to me personally. The Midnight Lie is a sapphic fantasy YA novel, and it's following a young girl who's kind of uncovering the mysteries of her city. She's always been secluded in the poor area, kind of fighting to survive in this harsh world. This foreigner comes to visit this island that she lives on, and she kind of opens up her world and takes her out of the poor quarters where she's living. It has really strong writing. I thought it was really beautiful and lyrical without being too purple. Again, it's really focused on these character developments, and just the romance was so sweeping and epic and just heartbreaking. I just really love this first book. The characters are complicated, they make mistakes, they make a big mess, and it's really about their growth and development, and I'm just really highly looking forward to the second and concluding book in this duology. The next series I have on here is The Raven Cycle and the Dreamers Trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater. The Raven Cycle just scratches a very particular itch for me. It has like all these things that I like. It's got magic, witches, got atmosphere and whimsy, and like a very dark, mysterious forest. It's got psychics, it's got magical beings in it. It's just very weird, very specific, and these kind of over-the-top crazy characters are just really grounded in their emotions and what they're going through, and they're also grounded in this really fantastical setting with beautiful, really specific, beautiful to me writing. I just love the juxtaposition of the characters like saying curse words 1 minute and then just like very lyrical prose joining those sentences. The Raven Cycle is really interesting because there is a main character, but there is a big ensemble cast that gets their own perspective and their own like little moments, and every character does have development, they do have growth, and it's really great to see that. And again, the Dreamer Trilogy is really focused on Ronan and his story arc, but again, the other characters are there, they get their moment to shine, they get their moment to develop, and I just really enjoy it. The next in progress series I have is Naha the Don by Mizuho Kusanagi, and this is a manga series that is still ongoing. This series follows a young girl who has to escape from her castle once there is a coup, and she escapes with her bodyguard Hawk, and from there they discover like a prophecy and they go on a big epic journey through her kingdom. Yona starts as a very naive girl, very much into like looking beautiful, falling in love, all that kind of stuff, and through this traumatic experience she starts to see her kingdom for the first time, and she really learns and grows into a strong, independent individual. Just her character growth is just so phenomenal. It just made me fall in love with the series. I love all of these side characters. I love her romance. The villain is particularly really interesting to me because he's not exactly a villain, or he's at least a very complex villain. Everyone has their own moral code, their own reasons for doing things, and the characters are just so strong, the character development is so strong that it just makes this series worthwhile. I would definitely give the anime a try. I would give the manga series a try. It's one of my favorites. I've been reading it for years because I love it so much. And the next in progress series I have on here is the Graceling series. So the Graceling series is a 3-series companion novel, and there has recently been a new addition to the series. I'm normally not a big fan of when writers go back and write a new book into the series, but Kristen Kesher is kind of the exception because she always does really interesting things with her books. Because this is a companion series, each book follows a different character and their growth and development. I've only read the first 3, but I've really enjoyed all 3 of those books, Graceling being my favorite though. And they're just really strong fantasy series. I feel like they really lasted through the times. It just works still. There is a fantasy setting, there's fantasy plot, but the story really centers and circles around these characters going through these obstacles, and I just love them. And now we're going to get into my YA series that I've completed, or there's only 1 book for. So the first book on this list is a new edition, which is In Other Lands. I read this book for the first time a couple months ago and fell in love with it. I did a whole review just kind of gushing about how much I enjoyed it. Again, this is a very strong character-focused novel. It's kind of rambling and meandering in a really interesting way. I don't think it's plotless, but it feels almost slice-of-life fantasy, which I want more of. In Other Lands follows a young boy who goes to a magical school, and like that premise suggests, there's a lot of tropes that this character faces, but the tropes are all put on their heads, and I really liked this book because, one, it's so chunky, but because it goes through so many years of this young character's life, we just get to see it change from a middle grade novel into a YA novel. We get to see the characters grow up and change. We get to see this young man like make mistakes, discover himself, try new things, get in bad relationships, get in good relationships that don't work out. It's just a really good book, and I highly recommend it. The next book I have on here is Howl's Moving Castle, and I'm treating Howl's Moving Castle as its own novel. There is a companion series, but my favorite is Howl's Moving Castle, and I think it is a standout in the series as a whole, and it's the one I recommend. Howl's Moving Castle has been since made into a Studio Ghibli film, which is a very popular movie. It's one of my favorite movies, and even though the book and the movie are so different, I recommend them and love them equally. But Howl's Moving Castle follows a young girl who is the oldest sister in her family, and she believes believes because she is the oldest, like the prophecies and legends say, that she is destined to just not have very much luck in her life. So she just kind of resigns herself to working in her family's hat shop while her sisters go to find fortunes. But fortune strikes her, she meets the witch at the waist, and she falls under an enchantment, becoming an old woman. And from there, she stumbles into Howl of the Moving Castle, who is a wizard who eats girls' hearts. This book is just really charming, and I just love seeing Sophie's growth throughout this book, and I just really love it. It's a really, really good book, and I really recommend it. The next series I have on here is the Fullmetal Alchemist series, which is another manga series, which has been since made into 2 very popular anime series. Fullmetal Alchemist follows 2 young brothers who, when they were younger children, they decide to try and bring their mom back from the dead with alchemy. But alchemy is a magic system that is built on the idea that nothing can come from nothing, and what is the price of souls? So because they try to bring their mother back, they face consequences, and because of those consequences, they are on a journey to rectify that. And from there, they find out that there's a whole big secret plot under the network of this world that's going on that they have to try and figure out and face. Fullmetal Alchemist is redeemed as one of the best anime series of all time, one of the best manga series of all time, and I highly stick by it. It's a really fun, engaging series. I love all the characters and their growth. They really challenge really philosophical ideas, and I decided to read the entire thing during quarantine, and I just really, really enjoyed my time doing that. It just sticks out to me as a really, really strong, specifically fantasy series. The world is just really unique and perfected. The magic system is really unique and interesting and interconnected, and it's just everything about it is a masterclass in how to write a good, compelling fantasy series with good, compelling characters. The next series I have on here is the Fire and Thorns series, which also recently got like a spin-off book. The Fire and Thorn series is a fantasy series that follows one young princess who is kind of shipped off to a neighboring kingdom to be the king's new bride. She doesn't have a lot of confidence in herself. She faces a lot of fat phobia, both internal and external in the series, but she slowly gains confidence in her abilities and her magic, and she slowly grows as a character throughout the series. I just really, really love what this series does. I really love the love interest that happens later on in the series. Really love how this series is so focused on character growth, and that character growth is so interwoven with the plot of the story. I read this series for the first time a couple years ago, and I just really, really enjoyed it, and it just sticks out to me in my mind as a really fantastic YA fantasy series. And now we can get into the adult category. There are a lot of adult fantasy novels and series that I want to read. This is kind of where I'm heading towards in my future reading plans. There's still a lot of YA series I want to catch up and get into, but I would say for the most part what is exciting me is these adult science fiction and fantasy series and novels. I just feel like a lot of adult series do something really compelling, and they really try and do something a lot of times. In adult, there is like a more genre literary fiction thing going on right now. There's a lot of fantasy and sci-fi novels that are going towards more the literary side, which just really, really interests me as a writer. And so while I haven't read a lot, there is a lot of really good stuff that I have read. So let's get into some of the series I have in progress. The first one being Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in a fantasy series. I'm not sure how long the series is going to be, but this first book just really, really enticed me. It was a really compelling novel, and I had to put it on this list because I'm really looking forward to the rest of this series. Black Sun is a fantasy series that is inspired by Latin American and Central American mythology and Native American and indigenous peoples. So it is a fantasy setting in fantasy myth and mythology that we don't get a lot of. It's a multi-perspective story following a bunch of different characters as their different motivations clash and work towards this like big eclipse thing that's going to happen. And I would say the main character of this series is this sailor who she's just going through a rough time. She's just trying to get through her day, and she kind of gets saddled into all of this mess. Again, I just really loved the characters. I found them really compelling. They were all very different from each other, but they were just really interesting to follow. No one perspective was uninteresting, and I just found the setting and the writing just really compelling, and it just made me want to read more. The next series I have in progress is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet companion series. I read the first book, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The first book follows a crew of different characters that live on this spaceship that is a tunneling spaceship that basically makes makes wormhole portal things from one end of the galaxy to the other. It's a very dangerous job, but a very sought after job. And while there is like a big plot line going underneath it, it's really just about this crew living their day-to-day lives, facing obstacles, discovering secrets about each other, growing closer. There's a diverse cast in that there's alien characters and that there's queer characters, and it's just a really, really fantastic series, and I really loved this first book, and I can't wait to read the rest of Becky Chambers' works because this was just such a fun, exciting, softer sci-fi read, and I just really enjoyed how refreshing it felt. And the last in progress series I have on here is the Waiver Children series, and this is a novella series following Portal children as they return from their Portal fantasy worlds. There's definitely books in this series I like more than others, but I would say as a whole I really, really enjoy this series, and I really love some of the characters and want to see and know what happens to them. I would say the Jack and Jill books are my favorite, which is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. One of the more recent ones, I can't remember which one it is. I think it might be maybe it's this 5th book. I don't know. I think there's about 6 books out now. Gonna be a whole lot more. They're novellas. They're really short. They're really fun reads. And some of my favorite books in the series just do some really, really compelling things. It's not just like fantasy books. They're trying to say something, and I really enjoy that. And now we're going to be getting into the books that I've finished or are standalone books. The first book I have on here is An Unkindness of Ghost by River Solomon. This is a recent read for me, and this is a book that takes place on a spaceship, which is akin to the antebellum South, in that there is a very strict racial hierarchy. I know not everybody likes to have like racism, homophobia, that kind of stuff in their science fiction and fantasy books, and I agree to some extent, but when the book has it in there purposefully and is doing something with it and saying something about our world, I think that it can be just so compelling and so interesting, and that is what this book is doing. The characters are black, the characters are queer, they're neurodivergent, and it's just really, really, really fascinating to see them facing the obstacles of this spaceship and of this world. The main character, I would consider, people would probably say unlikable, but I just found them so, so compelling, and I just loved watching their journey as they discover themselves and what they want and how the spaceship works and what to do about it. The next 2 books I have on here are by the same author, but they are not companion books, and that is Cersei and the Song of Achilles. Now, I didn't know quite where to put this because it's not technically a fantasy sci-fi book. The only other thing you could kind of categorize it is like historical fiction, but I don't really think it's that either. Both Cersei and the Song of Achilles are like retellings of the Greek myths and legends, so it is magical and all that fantasy stuff, but it's just, you know, retellings of myths. I find what Madeline Miller does with these books just so compelling. I just love how she writes them. I just love them so much. The Song of Achilles follows Achilles and Patroclus and their love story, while Cersei follows the minor goddess Cersei in her life. And these books are just so, so compelling, and the stories that they're trying to tell, they're heartbreaking, but they are both so, so good. The next book I have on here is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and I'm counting this as a standalone because that's how the first book is written, and I'm not planning on reading the rest of the series, to be honest. But our first book, Vicious, follows 2 young scientists, or 2, I think they're grad students. It's been a while since I've read Vicious, but it's following these 2 grad students who are invested, who are trying to figure out how to give themselves superpowers. I'm not a big superhero person. This has like very superhero-ish vibes to it, very anti-hero vibes to it, but this book is just so more compelling in the way that it tells the story, and it's really about the characters just being kind of awful, hating each other, having made mistakes and trying to face the consequences, having very different moral codes, and it's just a really, really compelling novel. The next book I have on here is How to Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Elle Motar. And How to Lose the Time War is about 2 spies on opposite ends of this time war. They're going through time, but they're sending letters to each other and slowly falling in love with each other, and just, I love this book. I love the writing, I love the characters, it's just so, so good. How You Lose the Time War, it's a little weird, it's definitely not for everybody, but if you like that literary fantasy stuff, definitely give it a try. The next book I have on here is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, or the Carl series by Hank Green. This is a duology science fiction series, and it's following a young girl who, on her way home on the subway, finds a statue and decides to film a video about it. The video goes viral when all these statues are discovered all over the world. It's a deeply human series. It's really connected about how the global world works and how the internet works. And I just really love what this novel series is saying, and it's a really, really compelling sci-fi series. And the final series I have on this list would not be complete without it, is the Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin. The Broken Earth series, or the Broken Earth trilogy, is a 3-book fantasy series following a young woman in a very cruel and toxic world. Basically, this world has this thing called orogeny, which are people that are able to use the magic or the energy that comes from the earth. And in this world, there's a very hierarchical system, which is really, really just dangerous, especially for people that possess orogeny. And the reason why this system exists is because there's things called seasons, which are just really, really bad, like natural disaster occurrences that happen for like a season. It's a very dangerous world, but it makes for such a compelling setting for this story. This is a multi-perspective story, and the way that N.K. Jemisin crafts through perspectives is just mind-blowing. This series is mind-blowing. You can read it for the first time and want to restart the series over directly, because reading the series for the first time is probably a completely different experience than rereading the series again, because of what you know going into the first book again. It's masterful. It is just so amazing what this series is and what it does, and I highly recommend it. It's one of the best fantasy series that I've ever read. But yeah, that concludes what are my current favorite fantasy and sci-fi reads at the moment. Again, there are favorites from other genres. I'd love to do one on my favorite current manga, but it was just really fun just curating this list and figuring out what are my current favorite reads. What are the reads that I think of fondly in a genre that I love? But yeah, let me know what are some of your favorite science fiction and fantasy reads. I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys later, and happy